Hello and welcome back to another Shudder Sunday, episode 10, where I'll be telling you the story about Dean Corll. This is the house where Dean Corll lived. It is located in Pasadena, which is a city in the southeast of Houston, Texas. Corll was a sadistic serial killer who tortured and murdered at least 28 teenagers during the early 1970s. He was nicknamed the Candyman because he owned and operated a company called Corll Candy Company. During his murder spree, he was aided by two teenage accomplices. These accomplices agreed to lure victims back to the house at 2020 Lima Drive in exchange for money. When the victims went inside, they were usually given alcohol or drugs and then tricked into wearing handcuffs. Once they were incapacitated, they were either tied to Corll's bed or handcuffed to a plank of wood that was nailed to one of the walls. At that stage, Corll would rape, beat and torture them for days on end until he finally decided to strangle them to death. Of the 28 murders that he committed, 8 took place at his address. Before moving to Pasadena on March 7, 1973, the former Army soldier and candy company owner was living in an apartment on Wurtz Road, which is in northwest central Houston. His horrific crimes finally came to an end on August 8, 1973, when one of his accomplices shot him to death at his house with a .22 caliber pistol. The photo on the left is from August of 1964, when Corll joined the US Army. The Army granted him an honourable discharge 10 months later after he asked to leave in order to help out with his family's candy business. On the right you can see a photograph of Dean and his half-sister Joyce. In June of 1968 his family's candy company went out of business. From that point on, he worked as an electrician at Houston Lighting and Power. Corll had two teenage accomplices called David Brooks and Elmer Henley. Brooks and Henley agreed to lure other teenagers back to the house in exchange for money. In the early hours of August 8, 1973, Henley brought Timothy Curley and Rhonda Williams back to the residence at Lima Drive. The fact that Henley had allowed a girl to return with them angered Corll so much that it eventually led to a physical confrontation between the pair. Although cooler heads prevailed and they managed to settle things, Henley soon decided that he no longer wanted any involvement in the crimes. While Corll was torturing Timothy, a bewildered Rhonda asked Henley if he was going to do anything about it. At that point, it seems as though Henley finally snapped. While Corll was focused on Timothy, Henley grabbed a pistol and shouted that he couldn't go on any longer. This sparked another confrontation in which Corll charged towards him and dared him to open fire. Realizing that his life was in serious danger, Henley squeezed the trigger and shot Corll 3 times. After being hit, the wounded Candyman stumbled out into the hallway, bounced off a wall, and then fell to the floor. As he lay face down, Henley walked over to him and finished the job by shooting him in the back 3 more times. Following the shooting, Henley released both Timothy and Rhonda and called the police. Over the next couple of days, he confessed to his crimes and led the authorities to the victims' burial sites. After the extent of their crimes came to light, David Brooks and Elmer Henley were both found guilty of murder. Elmer Henley was found guilty of 6 murders and sentenced to life in prison. He is currently incarcerated at the John B. Connolly Unit in Karnes County. David Brooks, who's pictured here, was convicted of one of the murders and sentenced to life in prison. On May 28, 2020, he died from COVID-19 at the age of 65. In the photograph shown, they've marked the victims that died at Lamar Drive with a red dot. 17-year-old John Manning Sellers was also killed at this house. However, they were unable to find a photograph of him. Between September 25, 1970 and August 3, 1973, Dean Corll claimed the lives of at least 28 teenagers. The youngest victim was Jerry Lynn Waldrop, who was just 13 years old. In May of 1972, he murdered Billie Jean Balch Jr. 1 year later, he also killed Billie's younger brother, Michael. In the aftermath of each murder, he would wrap his victims in plastic and then bury them at one of his favoured locations. One of these locations was a rented boat shed. He also used a wooded area and 2 beaches. Corll and his 2 accomplices buried 17 boys underneath the boat shed. This is an aerial image of the yard that Elmer Henley led the police to. The bodies were buried underneath the floor of shed 11. The photograph in the top right-hand corner was taken on August 9, 1973, shortly before the police started digging up the floor. Thanks for watching another Shudder Sunday video. Make sure to like and comment and subscribe so you don't miss out on more shuddering stories. I'll see you next time.